All right, we just got the thumbs up, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name's Scott Wells. I'm the developer of a development tool called Illuminated Cloud. It's a plugin for IntelliJ IDEA, which is an IDE for Java and several other languages, and it extends that IDE for Salesforce development. That's me looking all happy, and let's just talk about what we're going to do today. So this is going to pretty much be a demo all the way through. There will be some time to talk about what's coming up in the future toward the end, and hopefully if there's time for Q&A. If we run out of time, I've got a lot of things I want to show. I'll just step outside and we can chat if you want. Certainly would love to meet all of you. But at a high level, here's what I'm going to show. There are some new features that have gone into the existing product, just so that you understand. The product's been out for a little over 2 years, and it has had a tremendous number of features added to it over that time. The current major version is 1.x. I'll talk about the relationship between that version, and I'm about to release the next major version, 2.0. But for 1.x, there are some new major features that I've added recently that I do want to show in case people aren't familiar with them. Obviously, Salesforce just released Salesforce DX. It went GA with Winter 18. I want to show the built-in support for that. Apex Doc, if you're not familiar with that, I'll show it, but it's basically a way to document your APIs, your Apex classes. And then some of the features of Illuminated Cloud 2.0. And this is not going to be an intro to Illuminated Cloud session. I've done those in the past. They've been recorded. This is going to be an overview of the new features, just so that you know. Some of the new features I want to show at a high level, and we'll obviously go into more detail as I show them, are refactoring capabilities for Apex, something I've wanted for a very, very, very long time. I know a lot of you have as well. Client-side code inspections and intentions, and what that really means is deep analysis of your code that will tell you when something is wrong, won't compile, or perhaps could be improved or optimized. And then the intentions are actually quick fixes for those things. Once they've been recognized by the IDE, the ability to just go and have the IDE fix that for you, take care of it. And then some intelligent code generation capabilities. So I'd like to go ahead and hold all questions until the end, if you don't mind, because again, I've got a lot I have to show. So let's just go ahead and head over into the demo. So let's take ourselves into the IDE, and I'm just giving myself kind of a blank slate here because I want to start with some of the 2.0 features, in particular refactoring, inspections, intentions, things like that. And let me just set the stage a little bit. When I develop, particularly in Java, other languages for which there's been traditionally more mature tooling, my approach, my workflow is to think about what information do I need access to in order to solve the problem I'm trying to solve. And I get that information. Generally, it's an expression, it's a call, or something like that. So for the sake of example, we'll just say schema.getGlobalDescribe. What I want to do is I want to enumerate all the S objects in the system. That is a beautiful screen. Thank you. How's that? So what I want to do is I want to extract some information about all the S objects in the system. So I'm going to do schema.getGlobalDescribe, and now I need to use that. And so this is what I've heard called right-to-left programming, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract that into a variable using a single keystroke. And it's going to recommend some names based upon the source of the information, getGlobalDescribe, or based on the type of the information you're extracting. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into a variable called getGlobalDescribe, and what I want to do with it is I want to enumerate those. So I'm going to use what's called a live template. These actually, I showed them last year. There's a whole set of them in the application that basically take idiomatic expressions, rote typing, things like that, and make it just a couple of characters. And I want to go through all the values, all the object types, and it's going to suggest various names for the loop variable. So I'm going to use object type, and all I really want to do with that right now is print out the object type. And generally when I do that, if you notice, GlobalDescribe is only used in one place. It was a means to an end. I actually extracted that just so I could use that live template, that iter live template, in order to enumerate across it. I want to get rid of it. And typically when I do this, I've gone up and I've highlighted this block, and I've cut it, and I've pasted it down at the usage, things like that, and then gotten rid of it. But now there's an inline refactoring. So I can just, again, hit a single keystroke, and it'll ask me, do you want to inline just the current usage? And notice it takes and expands out the actual expression. Or do you want to get rid of all usages and just go ahead and get rid of the original declaration, in which case it's gone, right? And you can do this kind of ad nauseum as you want. If I want to pull this out, I can extract this. It shows all the chained expressions. I can choose whatever I want, and it knows the data types of those expressions as I do it. So we'll put this in a variable called object types, and then I'm going to choose a small portion of that, and we'll put that into GlobalDescribe. And if you pull out yet another version of the same thing, notice that it suggested a unique variable name. Illuminated Cloud's going out of its way to make sure that you're not writing code that won't compile when it gets to the server. And so it's suggesting unique variable names for the current scope, the current context. And then if I wanted to get rid of that, again, it's very fast. I'm just going to go through a series of inline refactorings. So that's just a way that you can use extract and inline to decide whether you need code reuse, in which case you can extract it into something that can be reused across multiple usages, or if you want to make your code compact, in which case you can use inline to take the expression and just put it at the point of use. Another example of this, let's go and get, say, userinfo.get organization name, and let's extract that into a variable. Let's take a look at one of the code inspections. Again, I have looked at the code inspections that I use in Java. I've tried to pick like the top 5 right now. I plan to implement lots. We'll talk about that at the end. But the 5 or 6 or whatever, they're going to give the best bang for the buck, the ones that are going to help you understand when your code's in a bad state, or you can optimize it or reduce your total cost of ownership. And in this case, you can see that this identifier is grayed out. And if we look at why that is, it's basically saying it's an unused declaration. It's detected dead code. And it can do this across your entire code base. I'll show an example of that as we go on. And it's doing this on the fly. If I actually add a usage of that, immediately it stops being dead code. If I remove that usage of it, it goes back to being dead code. And let's look at how the IDE can help us with that. I mentioned intention, so I'm just going to hit Alt-Enter, and it's bringing up the things that I can do to help with that. Right now, the one that it's choosing is I can remove that dead code. If I hit Enter, it's gone. Now, of course, that may present a problem because that may not have really been dead code. I may have commented out this block while I'm continuing to work on the problem that I'm solving. And in fact, that will show yet another inspection. Notice that this is red. It's telling me that I've got a reference to something that's no longer available. And so that's telling me my code, if I try to send this to server, it's not going to work. This is great for if you have a typo or if you refactor some code manually and you accidentally break something, you'll see it directly in the IDE immediately. So what are our other options? If we actually did intend to use that, I can bring back up that intention and I can just move to the right and it gives me options. I can turn this off because it's noise to me. But most of the time what you want to do is you just want to suppress it, which puts a little comment header above it that says, don't complain. When you see this problem, don't complain about, in particular here, the unused declaration inspection. So that's probably what I want right now, and then I can take that out once I've put all my usages in place because I really do want this code. And so one thing that you'll do, and again, we'll look at this in just a few moments, is if you run this across your entire code base, you can see all the dead code that's been accruing across the years because you haven't had insight into what's dead. And you can go and audit that and say, okay, this I actually need. There's some incoming reference that the IDE can't recognize, or I'm going to use it later or something like that. And so I want to suppress it there, but all this dead code can go away. We just did this with one of our projects, and I removed something like 13 or 15% of the code. It was stuff we were maintaining that just was not part of our total cost of ownership. It should not have been. Got rid of it. Absolutely wonderful. And so one thing you'll notice up here is that it's still yellow. It's still saying that this file is not quite what I want it to be. So it's effectively grading the file. It's funny, we were just talking about getting a grade on your code, and that's effectively what it's doing. So I can suppress at a higher level. I can suppress for the method, or I can suppress for the entire class recursively. So it's really up to you as to what you do. You can even turn off the entire inspection. Here's another one that's actually really useful. Let's go out and create, say, a standard controller. And what do you typically want to do with a standard controller? You want to get the object out of it so that you can use it. Well, the problem is that object is not strongly typed. It's an S object. And when you're working in a controller, that's not really what you want to work with. You want to work with a strongly typed S object. So let's just say contact equals that. And all of a sudden, Illuminated Cloud says, wait, something is wrong. And that something is it saying it's an illegal assignment from S object to contact. Those aren't convertible types inherently. I know it's a contact, but the language itself does not without a little help. So we give it a little help and have it add the cast operator for us. That's something at least I have to do all the time, and I have to go back over there and actually put in the cast operator. You should never have to do that anymore. Just type what you want to type, and then it'll highlight it and just hit 2 keys, and it's fixed. Very simple. So let's take a look at a couple of other things. Let's implement a few methods, or a few interfaces rather, and let's implement, say, install handler. Now, I don't have an inspection for this yet. I'm actually working on it right now, but typically, you would have to go up to this interface. You'd have to take a look at the signatures that you need. You'd have to copy them down. You have to adorn them correctly in order to make them right. And instead, I'm just going to hit Control-I, and it's going to basically show me, here's the unimplemented interfaces or interface methods, or you can also override from base classes. And so I can go in and just select these, and it gives me valid implementations of those so that I can go in and start filling them in. No more having to go and jump up and down in terms of the interfaces or base classes to copy down the actual method interface in order to have it. Just things that save you time, right? And that identify problems. So now let's look at some other things. My guess is that the refactoring that everybody's been waiting for is rename. Because it's really tedious, especially when these symbols can be scattered all across your code base, all across your metadata. So let's take a look at the usages of this method. One of the things about Illuminated Cloud is it's polyglot in nature. It understands multiple languages and the relationships across multiple languages. In this case, markup, whether it's Visualforce or whether it's Lightning, and Apex. And so you can see that there are usages of this method in the test class. There are also usages in markup, and they're not just usages, they're usages against the property syntax, the pseudo-property syntax. So it detected those, it provided actual references to them. Those are navigable references. It's part of the overall relational integrity of the system. So what happens if we rename this? And we'll just call this get list. And now let's go and find usages again, and it fixed everything. All the pseudo-properties were updated, everything, right? So it took care of that. And this is transactional, by the way. If I just do an undo, it undoes everything. So everything's back the way that it was before. But now let's take a look at the big one, and that is renaming an actual class, a top-level class or a top-level trigger where you've got files you need to rename, meta XML files you have to rename, you have to go out to the package XML file and you have to change the entry there, profiles, permission sets, all that. So in fact, if we look at usages here, you can see that we have exactly that. Illuminated Cloud has actually detected all these other usages in XML files, in source files, wherever they happen to be, and is tracking those. And so what happens if we rename this? Well, not only do you have to go find all those usages, typically, a little bit of a tedious, search and replace, you also need to go out and deploy that, get all the original usages unwound, and then go and delete the original. So if we go out and do a rename here, and I'm just going to call this 2, Illuminated Cloud's basically going to say, hey, you're doing something with a top-level name here. Let me go take care of this for you. So you can see it wants to delete the old one, deploy everything to make it whole. So I'm just going to say yes. And it's going to go out and it's going to do a deploy and then it's going to do a destructive changes, and in the end your org's going to be whole. It's going to take care of all that for you. If you want to undo that, right now the transactional undo doesn't include this. I actually say that in that dialog, I'll add that. But it's generally just as simple as going and doing the reverse rename. But let's take a look at what happened in version control, which should be the single source of truth whether you're in SFDX or not. You can see that it made all the appropriate changes to all the files where those references were, and you can see from a Git perspective it renamed the files and everything. So you're done. That took care of it for you. And if we go and rename back, again, it just warns, take us right back. Go ahead and send that to the background. I want to show one other thing with rename here. Now it's doing the delete to make everything whole. Let's take a look at this just to show that this is not just a glorified search and replace. This is the typical idiom where you have a field with a name and you have either setters, write accessors, or you have constructors and you pass in a parameter with the same name. So we have standard controller and we have standard controller, and you have to obviously qualify to disambiguate. This dot standard controller equals standard controller. You can see as the usages highlight that IC already recognizes these as being two different things inherently. And if we go rename them and say controller field and controller param, you can see that it took care of the right thing except for it didn't fix my spelling error. But that's great because we can actually just rename again and do that. Now, one of the interesting things about controller param is if we look at the usages of it, you can see that one of those usages is actually not even in code. It's an Apex doc. Apex doc, it tracks those usages. Additionally, if you had a usage in a string literal, used as a bind parameter for a dynamic SQL query, it tracks those as well, and it would go and rename those in place as well. It tries to track all references. The idea is after refactoring, you shouldn't be in a broken state. You should be in the desired state. So it takes care of that. And in fact, as far as Apex doc goes, let's use this as an example to actually show Apex doc. So if you start a documentation comment /** versus a normal block comment /* and just hit enter, IC looks at the actual declaration that you're trying to document and generates a template off of it. And at that point, full code completion, create new, put HTML in here, make it nice and pretty, shopping list, mobile view controller. And then down here you can say the standard controller, and down here you can say, and it knows about the various Apex doc tags, and it knows then that this is intended to be an actual type name, and again, you can see all the references highlighting. If that were a reference to one of my own types and I went and renamed it, it would get updated right there. So Apex doc, and then you can obviously go visualize your documentation directly from within the IDE. So Highly recommended that you take advantage of this and document your types, document your classes. Same thing works in if you're on Ultimate Edition of IntelliJ, if you're in JavaScript for Lightning, for Visual Force, or if you're using third-party libraries, single-page application type libraries, use ESDoc or JSDoc there. All right, so let's look at some of the other enhancements that have come in recently. If you don't have the toolbar turned on, I highly recommend it, View Toolbar. And you can see that there's now an Illuminated Cloud toolbar, and it has access to all the primary operations. I'm very obviously a keyboard guy. I don't like to move my hands from the keyboard. But for a lot of people who aren't, they have to, traditionally have had to go through, over here to Illuminated Cloud to start these operations. And now you've just got one-click access to all the primary operations. Deploy, retrieve, generate the offline symbol table, open up the various settings screens very conveniently. And then perhaps most importantly, the ability to get to any of your configured connections with a single click and just log into it. And it'll just bring it up in the browser. And in fact, while that's coming up, let's just go ahead and go back over. There's something else in that dropdown I want to show, and that is this. You see the little plugs. Those are traditional connections. That's to your DE org, or it's to your sandbox or whatever. But then we have these DX connections. Salesforce DX supports directly in here. And if we want to work with the Salesforce DX project, we don't have to open another application or anything like that. I actually have the Dreamhouse app already pulled out. I'll just open it in a new window and have that open right beside my traditional app, my traditional project. And you can tell that this is a DX project in a couple of different ways. First, the toolbar's changed. It's adapted. Now all the deploy, retrieve, delete, all that, it's changed to push and pull. The two operations for manipulating metadata between the local source, the local file system and the org, it's changed to those. Either take what I have locally and put it in the Scratch org and make them the same, or if I've gone into the Scratch org and I've done some clicks not code type things, I want to bring that back down, just do a pull. And it's very easy to initiate those. All the same key bindings hold, they all converge on push and pull respectively, but if I hit like Control S, it'll go out and it'll initiate a push to the org. If I do a retrieve through the keyboard or through the menu, it'll initiate a pull and go ahead and take care of it. And so it just pushed, and if you want to see what happened, you can go down here, and it's very similar to the output that you would have seen on the command line if you've been playing with SFDX. And by the way, you have full control over whether IC will do a push on your behalf. It's completely up to you. You can configure it right here. You can decide what operations result in an automatic push. If you want to turn it off completely and manage that yourself, you can. If you want to make it so that it always keeps the org up to date as you're making changes in the local editor, you can. It's up to you. Some of the other SFDX things that we can show to show that this is an SFDX project, it starts with your project.json. You can see that that's in here. You can also see that IC fully understands the new metadata layout. If you've played with SFDX, you know that it's quite different from the traditional layout. You have a much more flexible project structure, directory structure, and you also have the ability to take advantage of things like metadata decomposition, which means that that giant .object file that contained everything but the kitchen sink is now broken down into the object file itself and all the child metadata subtypes like fields, validation roles, web links, things like that, and they become digestible chunks. You can actually go in and work with them directly. And in fact, one of the things that IC's had for quite a while is it has the XSD for the metadata XML files built into it, so you get full completion. Like if I want to know the data types of a field, I can just get completion on that. With these smaller chunks and the ability to get validation, in fact, if I type in the wrong thing, you can see it turns red. Those code inspections, it's not a valid type. You can actually go in here with confidence and actually make changes to your metadata within the file instead of having to go into the org. You want to add a new field, find the field most like it, clone it, make the changes, and do a push, and you have that new field. Works really well. All the other features of IC work really well in Salesforce DX if you're used to the traditional features. So for example, we can go into the unit test runner, and there's something that's been added pretty recently, and that is the ability to set up an all unit test configuration, so you don't have to keep coming in here and uncheck, check. So you can go ahead and set that up. And so if I go into this Scratch org and say run with coverage, it'll just go out and run all the unit tests in the org, and then it'll load the coverage and show it to you immediately. And it's just tracking that. And again, that's exactly how it worked before. The whole point is it shouldn't work any different just because you're in an SFDX project. It should be identical. The field should be identical, except where there's an impedance mismatch. So for example, with push and pull, in IC, when you do a retrieve and deploy, you can do selective retrieves and selective deploys. And when you retrieve, you can diff. You can actually merge and diff. Well, SFDX manages push and pull, and it knows how to do incremental very efficiently, things like that, but it doesn't give you the ability to have explicit control over what you push and pull. So those types of things aren't available, but everything else is when you're in one of these projects. So that just ran, and if we scroll up, we can see all the coverage here. If we go into one of these files that's not entirely covered, Hopefully it shows up well. Yeah, you can see in the gutter over here, you can see covered lines and uncovered lines very clearly. Works exactly the way that you'd expect. And in fact, let's go over here to, say, a test. I'm just going to navigate to related. If you're not familiar with this, there is an action called goToRelated. And I've wired that up so that if there are related symbols or related files, it'll take you to them. In this case, the meta XML file, but also the classes that test this product class. You can navigate very quickly between tested and test classes. So let's go over to this test class. And another thing that's been added in 2.0 is very convenient access to all of your test capabilities. You can just click in the gutter of any test method or any test class, and do you want to run it? Do you want to debug it? Or do you want to run it with coverage? And debug here, just to be very clear, is not the live debugger. It's the post-mortem debugger, the offline debugger. And we'll go ahead and do that. And what that's doing, if you're not familiar with it, is it's running it with the really verbose log. It's pulling that down. It's parsing that into an execution tree and allowing you to step through it as if you were in a live debugger. And so at this point, I can step over, and I can see the bot command down here was just created. Step over, step over. You can actually debug your code. Very convenient debugging unit tests. You can even go over, as far as that goes, to say the log viewer. Let's say that you had a Lightning controller, server-side controller, or you had a Visualforce controller, or scheduler batch Apex, or an Apex REST API. You could go over and change your log levels to full debugging, go execute it, see it here in the log, bring it up, and then once the log body's up, just go over here and debug it. And you're brought into the debugger. So you can actually debug asynchronous processes as well. And that all works in DX just as well. So let's look at one other thing here. Let's see, SOQL query, that works. If you haven't seen this, I want to go and say, do a select star on all users in the system, fills in all the fields for me, go execute it. Here's every bit of information you ever wanted to know about all the users in the system, very conveniently, 4 characters. So that works. Anonymous Apex works. So I showed some of the inspections earlier. You can see that this file's yellow. Let's talk about why it's yellow. And in fact, to do that, let's just go out and inspect all code. This is a project I just checked out of Git. This is not something that I wrote. And so let's go run it. You can say where you want to run all the inspections, and you can also say which inspections in particular do you want to run. In this case, I've enabled all the Salesforce specific inspections, so I'm just going to go run them. And this includes not just the ones that I've written. If you're familiar with some of the static code analyzers like Lightning Lint, which will allow you to run ESLint plus some Lightning rules against all of your JavaScript, or PMD Apex, which is an extension of a project that's been around for quite a while for a lot of different languages called PMD. It's been extended by a team to work with Apex. And I know that the Salesforce security team's been contributing more and more roles to it as well. You can get a really good analysis of your code at this point. It ran all that, and you can see that there are 149 warnings here. And you can see the various sources of those warnings. So PMD Apex down here, that's just me invoking that externally. All you have to do is install it. This is available right now on 1.x, and it'll tell you about cyclomatic complexity. It'll tell you about security violations, like you're not encoding a URL parameter before you're using it in a query, things like that. You can configure which rules you want. You can look at the Lightning Lint warnings, and you can see things like console statements. You can see using double equals instead of triple equals, all that kind of stuff. Now, there's a couple of other inspections that I didn't show earlier that I'll go ahead and show here. And these are more subjective in nature, by the way. Versus before it was actually showing you errors, or it was showing you unused code, things like that. So an if statement, a control flow statement without braces. The only reason that I prioritize this toward the front is this has led to bugs in the past. It only obviously affects the next line. And if you accidentally don't indent your code right, you may think, if you're coming from Python or something like that, where you don't use actual block identifiers, you may think that it's affecting more because you over-indented. And in reality, you've got a bug. And so the way that you prevent that is you always make sure that you put braces around the blocks of control flow statements. And so it found several of those. And so what we can do is just go fix those right here, and it just fixed those. So you can see that this one now has braces around it. And if we look at the difference versus version control, that's the difference right there. By the way, IntelliJ's version control integration is absolutely astounding. It's not something that I did or anything like that, but it is one of my favorite features of the IDE. So if we go choose another one, okay, so let's move down here to usage case does not match declaration case. So Apex is an inherently case-insensitive language, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. except for the fact that if you work with a team, I don't know what your experience has been, but mine has been if you work with a team, everybody has their own opinion on what case a given identifier or a keyword or whatever should be. When you finally go into the code, it's kind of like formatter. Some people use tabs, some people don't. So you use a unified formatter and reformat all your code to match your corporate standards. Same thing here. How many people have seen select all lowercase in one file and then all uppercase in another, or capitalized, right? It's all over the place. Drives me crazy. So one of the things I wanted to do was canonicalize that. And so with a single, and by the way, with identifier names, there is an authoritative case. It's the case used in the declaration. That one's not subjective. That is the authoritative case. And so you can go over here and just fix all those. So I'm just going to change all usages to match declaration case, and it's done. Now, the other side of this is a little bit more subjective, and that is a keyword doesn't match the case. Now, I followed the Java conventions for this, where keywords are all lowercase, or for SQL, where keywords are all uppercase, and things like annotations are type case, leading cap, and then camel case, things like that. That may not match everyone's preferences. I'm going to add configuration for this so you can configure this the way you want. Right now, it's a little bit of my way or the highway on this one, but you can go out and fix that for consistency. And then let's look at the unused declaration one down here. So it found 10 unused declarations, and in fact, let's just expand all. And we can go through these, and it's basically saying these are unused. This is the nice thing, is you can run this across your entire code base. What you don't want to do is go up here and say remove all. That would lead to probably a bad state. But you can easily go through and just audit, and effectively you would say, okay, so you know what, this one, it's just because I don't ever use the result, and I'm doing this in a test class, so I can just take that out. And same thing on this one, just go through them. But you know, here's one that is never used, or I want to suppress this. You can go through, and once you get things to a stable state and the world goes green, check that in. And then the next time that you're going to do that is the next time you're doing a pull request that's going into your releasable code, and just make sure that you're keeping things nice and green. And you don't have to use all of my intentions or inspections I've put in place. Choose a subset that matches your preferences, your needs. So the next thing I want to show with regard to DX, version control is a single source of truth. As I said earlier, not just for DX. This is the way that it should be, but it's been prohibitively difficult in the past, especially if you're collaborating in a sandbox org or something like that. That's generally been the system of truth, right? With DX, it really pushes you to pull everything out in the local file system, get it into version control, be able to audit its evolution over time, things like that. So the nice thing is with IntelliJ's built-in version control, we can see everything that just happened there. But what happens if you want to start with a brand new DX project? What does that look like? Now, earlier when I was going through some dry runs of this, GitHub was being a little bit unresponsive. So rather than us sit here and watch a progress dialog on GitHub, I went ahead and just pulled out local file system in its pristine state. So the only thing that would be different between what I'm about to show and what I would have shown is I would have said new project from version control and would have just gone to GitHub. It would have pulled it out in the file system, and then IntelliJ would have said, do you want to open this project right now? I would have said yes. Instead, what I'm going to do is just say open project, and I'm going to go over here and open the raw version of what I pulled out. I'm going to put it into a new window, and this is exactly where it would have picked up. And at this point, Illuminated Cloud has recognized that not only is this a Salesforce project, in particular it's a Salesforce DX project, and it would walk you through adopting that, basically converting that for use. And so the first thing that you need to do is, this is DX, you need a scratch org. So it's saying you don't have a connection, so let's go ahead and create a scratch org. So I hit a plus there, and it brings me into the scratch org creation. All this is now integrated. It's not just push and pull and those types of things. You can manage your scratch orgs, and I'll talk about how that's even going to evolve over time. So there's already a file that defines the shape of the scratch org. So let's go in and load that right here. And so that pulled it in, and we'll change this to demo, and that's going to be the alias for the scratch org that gets created. Let's leave it at 30 days. We're using this for development. Last thing I want to do is go home, come in on a Monday, and have it gone every single week. So we'll go ahead and have it go out 30 days. If you wanted to, you could set your org shape, your features, your org preferences, things like that. By the way, on the org preferences, these have 3 states. The current state says use whatever is the default for the edition that you selected up here. If you check that, it says, no, I actually want that to be enabled explicitly. I don't know what the default state is, but I have to have that. If you go one more with strike through, that's saying I explicitly want that disabled if the org would enable that. So just to be clear on that, this is a 3-state thing in order to get your org shape exactly right. So let's go ahead and hit OK, and it says, okay, do you want to save this file as a new JSON file? And at this point, it's creating a scratch org. And to me, this is, if you've seen me talk about SFDX, you know that this is going to be a repeat statement. This is the coolest thing in the world, Because in the past, you had to go and sign up for a DE org, and then you got an email, and you clicked in, and then you spent, what, about 30 minutes going and getting that org the way that you wanted, at least. And now, it just creates an org for you in like a minute. And as soon as that gets done, it'll go and it'll add it to the list, get the access token, things like that. And that org will be available for us to use. And to me, that is just really cool. And since I said a minute, it's going to hold me to that, isn't it? And the point is, in just a moment, when this gets done, I'll show you, IC is going to prompt to set up the source roots, to generate the offline symbol table, and all that, so that you can actually use this project. And that's it. That's all that's going to be involved in this. So we'll let that keep going. For the sake of time, we'll come on back, because that's not under my control. And just talk about that. That's the demo. That's basically the features that I wanted to show. There were a few other things that were right behind this that we'll get to in this finish. But let's just go ahead and go over and talk about what's next. So the features I just showed are a mixture. Some of them are in the current shipping product, 1.x. Everybody already has access to them, or if they want, can have access to them. And that includes Salesforce DX support. It includes the Apex doc support. It includes the toolbar and the ability to open any of your connections, things like that. That's all there. The refactorings, the code intentions and inspections, the code generation, like the implement override methods, that's all coming in 2.0. And when I say coming in 2.0, that's not a far-flung future. I actually originally had an intention of having it released before I came here. Some complexities got in the way there, but I'm maybe 2 weeks off. I'm planning for mid to late November. If it's ready, I'll release it when it's ready. I want it to be a very seamless, pleasant experience for people to upgrade, for people to purchase. But the point is that it's really, really, really close. You can see based on the demo I just did. So let's talk about what that means for 1.x customers, a brand new version coming out. 1.x licenses are perpetual. That means that they're not going to stop working. They're not going to stop being supported. What is going to stop happening is new feature development. All major new feature development is going to occur on the 2.0 line. There are probably small things I'll work back in just because I'll work on them. It'll be easy and I want to throw it in. I think everybody will benefit from it. That's just kind of my way of working. But for the most part, new features will go into 2.0. From a support standpoint, critical and blocker issues, absolutely. File them. Let's look at business impact. I'll take care of them. I don't want anybody not to be able to use the product. And then, obviously, every time that Salesforce does a seasonal release, summer 18, winter 18, whatever it happens to be, I need to go and do some updates to make sure that it's talking to the right API clients, things like that. For the next 2 to 3 seasonal releases, either summer 18 or winter 19, I'll continue to do the full updates. That doesn't mean it's going to stop working after that. It just means that it won't be updated for any new features to that API. You'll be able to specify new API versions, but it won't necessarily have access to all the features. If you want that, you would have to go to 2.0. But it will continue to be supported. Every user, existing licensed user of 1.x gets an upgrade discount. It's moving to a subscription-based license. Again, all the details are right there. We can chat about that after if you guys want in terms of some of the details. But the point is everybody gets access to a discount based on recency of purchase. So as far as where I'm going with 2.0, you can pretty much see the theme here. I'm basically trying to narrow the gap between what you can do in IntelliJ and other mature tools for established languages, entrenched languages like Java and C# and things like that, and what you can do in Apex. Every time that I try, especially with all these things there now, the ability to do some of those refactorings and things, now I go and reach for things that aren't there yet in Apex. I think I'm in Java. And every time I do that, I'm like, oh, okay, and I go put that on the list and prioritize the list. Constantly trying to narrow that gap, and I always look for feedback from users in order to help with that prioritization. So additional refactorings, additional inspections and intentions, going back to refactorings, all the extraction and introduce refactorings, move, copy, all that, that's aware of the metadata and the implications on the metadata when you do it. Inspections and intentions, always working through the ones. If I end up using one in Java, it goes to the top of the list of it in Apex. And then code generation capabilities. You saw implement override. I also plan to add things like, if you've got multiple fields and you want to add a constructor, it can generate a constructor for you that takes those fields as parameters and automatically sets them. Accessor methods, things like that, the ability to generate those. Smart code completion. I'm actually really proud of Illuminated Cloud's completion engine. It's very intelligent as it is. It's very contextually sensitive. But there's one feature that it's missing I use all the time in Java, and that is, let's say you're calling a method, and its first parameter is a contact, and I hit Control Space. It shows me all the completions that are available, very few of which will actually match the type contact. In Java, if I hit Control Shift Space, it will narrow that down. It will filter it to things that are assignable to that. It makes it extremely fast to go through your completions. Setting parameters to function calls. If you've got an expression, it knows the left-hand side and it changes based on the filter type, things like that. Absolutely want that. Some Salesforce DX enhancements. Yeah, 30 days is great, but then you come in on Monday and your org's expired. IC will tell you that, and it will take you into that screen. You can go create your org, recreate it with the same alias, and the world's a happy place. It should be able to just automate that. It should be able to see if the org's expired, pop up and say, hey, I can go create a new org for you, push your metadata into it, and just let you get back to work. Take care of that. And then test environment management. One of the key aspects of DX is that your development scratch org should not be a place where you go and do functional testing. It should be considered an extension of your development workstation. And the most testing that should happen there will be unit testing. No side effects, no external dependencies, things like that. That doesn't mean that functional testing, feature testing is not a valuable exercise. It absolutely is. It just means it should happen somewhere else. And so what I want to do is make it so that the various entry points for what you really think of as being an application, yeah, see, glad we didn't wait. Timed out talking to the server trying to create a scratch org. I guess everybody's trying to do that right now. So let's just go back over here. And just going to try to convert the project now. Is it? Yeah, okay, it's coming up there, great. So on the DX enhancements, what I want to do is take the various entry points that you have. If you think about this, this is going to be a traditional like a Tabs app or a Lightning app or a Visualforce page or an Apex REST service or something like that. This is really what you're developing and want to test from an external perspective. So give you the ability to select that and create a run configuration off of that and have IC be responsible for going and either creating or repurposing a test scratch org, pushing your metadata into it, letting you supply a script to post-process, do things like create users and assign permission sets to those users and load it up with data, and then take you to that entry point. And if you've worked with other IDEs in more traditional environments like Java with an application server or Python with Django or something like that, that's exactly what you do. I want to go run this, and it brings up another container effectively over here, and it takes you into it, deploys your code into it. It doesn't kind of corrupt your local working space. I want it to just be seamless, single button push. And status overlay. Force source status from the SFDX CLI will give you a lot of information about the relationship between the source that you have in your local file system and the source in your scratch org, the metadata in your scratch org, what's present in each, what's different in each, things like that. And so what I want to be able to do is make it so that that's overlaid in the IDE itself. Right now, in version control, in IntelliJSON version control, you can see that if something's blue, it's been edited. If it's green, it's been added. If it's orange, it's been deleted. I can show the exact same thing about the relationship between your local source and the org source and give you visual indicators of exactly what you're doing. I want to overlay that. And the last one is the live debugger support. This has been requested by quite a few ISVs recently. Obviously, I showed the offline debugger, the kind of post-mortem debugger, but the live debugger obviously solves an entirely different class of problems, especially if you're an ISV. And I'm an ISV. That's my day hat that I wear. And so the reason I'm putting that in is as much about me being selfish as about trying to help other people. I want it. I want to be able to go out and actually do interactive live debugging against a suspended process. The reality is that's not broadly available yet because it's expensive. And when I say expensive, I don't just mean cost money. I mean it's expensive to Salesforce because they're suspending open transactions that are shared. They're actually shared resource among all of us in a multi-tenant environment. And so it is becoming more available, and they're certainly looking at ideas at how to make it even more available in scratch orgs and such. And I want that to be there so that you can just start doing real, normal debugging of your code in Illuminated Cloud as you're developing it. So that's kind of what's on the roadmap. So with that, I don't know how we are on time. The timer never went off up here. 5? Okay. If anybody has any questions, if we have just a couple of minutes, feel free. If not, we can, like I said, I can step outside and be happy to answer any questions you have.
I got a list. So when you're doing refactoring and renaming, can you rename the instance of that class?
Yeah, absolutely. When you say the instance, can I...
Right, so you rename the class, it renames it everywhere in your source. What about the instance name of that?
At a point of use?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I actually didn't show that, but let's go back over here to the DF17 project, wherever it is. Okay. Am I missing it? It doesn't, yeah, there it is. And let me close down PowerPoint. Yeah, basically any symbol name that's available to you, you can just hover over it, and at the point of declaration, or you can do it through a reference. So for example, this is a usage of a standard controller. And let me know if I'm misunderstanding. And again, I can go and rename that usage of it, and by default, it's going to give me suggestions based on the type. But I can absolutely go rename that. I can rename shopping list down here and call it lists. Pretty much any variable that you see in Apex. The only things you can't rename are system types, because I don't own them. You don't own them. You can't rename system types, and I haven't made it yet that you can rename S objects and fields, because that is a whole other ball of yarn, right? But anything in Apex that is a declaration, you can just either hover over the name of it in the declaration or any usage of it and hit Shift F6 and start renaming.
Very impressive, but are you the only guy that supports and builds this product? I mean, how does a customer worry about you getting hit by a bus?
Oh boy. I was wondering if that question was going to come back up. Well, I avoid buses, but so this question came up in a recent chat with the Salesforce Bay Area Salesforce Developer User Group. So the answer is yes. I am everything you saw there. That's me. I've been doing that, provide support for it, things like that. I understand the question. I understand the question completely, because you get a company, an organization that decides to switch over to this. It's not the cost of the product. It's getting everybody trained up on it, and if something happened, having to switch off. I know that people have experienced that recently, right? And so that is a non-trivial cost associated with it. There is absolutely a mitigation plan in place. So my wife is actually a partner in this, and she and I have put together a mitigation plan. In the unfortunate event something happened to me, that we would be able to hand this off to another group to be able to take it and evolve it. There would be obviously a trough in productivity there while the other team ramped up and things were transitioned, but it's definitely contemplated. Not contemplated that I get hit by a bus, but contemplated that if that happened, we would be able to accommodate for it.
Hi, so when you do refactoring, I understand I can do safe refactoring for classes that are static. What about classes that are used kind of like in a reflection type? So for example, you have a string as a class name and you do like .new instance for the class. Can it refactor that safely?
So if you pass a literal, string literal that has a type name in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it actually does look for names in string literals by themselves or as bind parameters in SOQL queries, if it sees it as a SOQL query, and it'll treat that as a reference, same way it does in comments and things like that. Cool. Yeah.
I was thinking it'd be nice to have some really good comprehensive documentation, so that like when I try to evangelize this tool, like where I work, people are like, well, where's the doc? I mean, how do I use it? Well, you just sort of have to play with it and figure it out. You know, it'd be really great to have some good, comprehensive, clear documentation to go with this.
No, that's absolutely fair feedback. And so one of the things that I'm doing with 2.0 is planning to address that. Rather than go write a lot of documentation, by the way, we're about to run out of time, but just finish up with this one. Rather than go write a bunch of documentation that then could potentially become stale, I'm going to go do some videos that could become stale, because that's happened in the past. But what I am planning on doing is short snippet, not long 10-minute videos for the various use cases. So I'm going to break it up into how do you create a new project? How do you get metadata moved back and forth? How do you debug something? Things like that. And it's going to be broken up into very small snippets, each about a minute or two. And then I'm going to make those so that's all indexed. You can get into it and potentially even link that into the product so you can very quickly get to it. So it is something that I've heard frequently is there's a lot there. I don't even know what I'm missing, right? And for the things that are there, I'm not always entirely sure where to go, and that's definitely one of the things I want to address. So I'm happy to chat with people outside. I think I need to go ahead and start scooting out there. Thank you very much.